I had a request to speak specifically about meditation today, and in particular dealing with the body and its various complaints and aches and pains as part of the practice. We have started our annual book study, and the book we're doing is a Zen book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and in the section on practice there's a great deal about posture and sitting. This is something in the Zen tradition that's made a very great deal of. The practice they do is called shinkaza, just sitting. And that's part of the idea is that once sitting perfectly, the mind will follow and be in a perfect condition. I recall going once to a lecture by a Zen priest who was speaking about practice, and he went on for, his talk was at least an hour long, and I kept waiting for him to actually talk about the meditation. He was talking about sitting, and I to begin with, I thought that was a preliminary remarks telling you how to sit, but he went on and on and on in detail about how you hold the body, and I realized eventually that that's it for that tradition is you're sitting perfectly, then you're doing the meditation. So it's a kind of a body meditation. In the Theravada tradition, we generally don't make such a big emphasis on posture. Not that it's unimportant. The posture you sit in really does have a very big effect on how well you're able to tame the mind. The ideal posture is to sit cross-legged with the back straight. And the traditional, there's various what they call mudras, of ways of holding the hands, and you'll see that in there's representations of the Buddha. There's a whole science of the mudras of Buddha statues. And there's different mudras for meditation. The one that's mostly used in Theravada is to sit with the right hand resting in the left hand, and ideally with the thumbs lightly touching. This is the meditation mudra. You'll see in Buddhist statues that come from Thailand particularly that the Buddha is usually sitting half lotus, and so you'll see in very uncommon to see Thai Buddha statues sitting full lotus. There's different degrees of crossing your legs. The full lotus posture is to have each foot on the opposite thigh. That's full lotus, and it's rather difficult if you've not done it before. A half lotus is to sit with one foot on the floor basically, and the other foot on the opposite thigh. That's half lotus. Quarter lotus is the foot resting on the opposite calf. And what the Burmese call the easy posture is to not have the legs crossed at all, but to sit with both feet essentially on the floor. It's not recommended to cross your feet at the ankles. That puts a lot of stress on the posture. Alternately, one can sit on those benches, the Burmese-style benches, with your legs tucked underneath. That keeps the spine very straight. The one kind of really important aspect of posture is keeping the spine straight, that one's not slumped over or leaning. That will tend to make the mind dull if you're leaning, and also although it momentarily might feel, if you're sort of hunched over, it momentarily feels easier. It does put stress over time, and you'll have more trouble with your back than if you sit straight. The back shouldn't be rigid. When I say straight, it's not rigid like a iron poker. It's actually a very gentle S curve, but it's upright. It's not leaning one way to the other. You should think of it as the center of gravity is running down the center of your spine. The Visuddhimagga has the image of thinking of what your backbones, your vertebrae as a pile of coins. If they're not piled up straight, they'll fall over. You know? If the center of gravity is running down the center of your spine, then you're essentially at ease. You're not having to use muscular tension to hold yourself up. You're balanced. One thing a lot of people like to do when they start a sit is to do a little bit of a stretch of the spine. You visualize that there's a cord pulling your head up, and you stretch the whole thing up and then relax into the posture. The head should be very slightly leaning forward, and that find that that's the ideal posture. But no matter what you do, there's going to be aches and pains in the body. The first thing to recognize is this is a natural condition of the human body. We're embodied in this level of existence in an imperfect form. We are going to always have some degree of pain in the body. It's not unnatural, it's not a special issue, it's just a natural condition of the body, it's dukkha. But realizing that, it is wise, it's skill in means to try and minimize that, to have as much physical ease as you can for the practice. It does help to do some stretching. Some yoga is very, very good, particularly if you're on a retreat and you're doing a lot of meditation, spending a lot of time sitting cross-legged. It can help with that to do some yoga as part of the daily routine, to stretch the body. In particular for people raised in cultures where we sit in chairs from an early age, and that would be Europeans as well as Chinese, chair-sitting cultures, as opposed to Indians and Thais who sit on the floor. If you're raised sitting in chairs, then it does have a deleterious effect on your hip joints. The hips become less flexible over the decades. And this is the primary cause for difficulty in sitting comfortably in a cross-legged posture on the floor. Hip joints don't have the full range of movement that they would have if you'd been sitting naturally from childhood. So you don't necessarily feel it in the hips. You'll feel it more likely in the knees or possibly the ankles, but it's the hips don't have the full range of movements is the problem. So any exercise you can do that increases the range of movement of the hips is very useful. And a particular yoga pose that's good for that is called the cobbler's pose. It's the one where you're sitting flat on the floor, no cushion under your bum, and you put your soles of your feet together and bring them in as close to the body as you can, and stretch the knees down towards the floor. You be careful doing that. It's a very, very good posture, very healthy posture to do. It said in a yoga book I read, it said that for women doing that posture, it makes childbirth easier, and for men, it prevents difficulties with the prostate gland. So it's supposed to be good for all those sort of lower plumbing, issues. Be careful if you do it wrongly, you can, like a lot of yoga, you can hurt yourself. Don't try to bounce the knees down, and definitely don't push them down with your hands. Just stretch them, let them stretch, and you'll feel a nice stretch sensation and just hold it as long as you can. You can actually hold that pose for a long time. You can even try meditating in it. Another pose that's recommended to help with sitting is the seated hero's pose. Basically, you're kneeling with your shins on the floor, and it's important that they're parallel, that you're not pointing the toes in or out, that the shins are parallel, and they're wide enough apart that you sit down on the ground in between your legs. And if you don't have enough stretch to quite make it down to start with, you can put a cushion under your bum, but you should be trying to get it so you're sitting on the floor between your legs with the legs parallel, the shins, the lower legs parallel. And if you're able to do that without any difficulty, then the next stage is to lean back until you're lying down backwards. And that particular pose is good for the knees and ankles. Last, I'm going to mention of yoga poses that are useful for sitting. This is particularly for if you're doing a lot of sitting and your legs start to get, you start to feel like their circulation's bad, or they're feeling funny, is to do upside down poses, either shoulder stand or headstand, and to really stretch while you're doing it. Stretch, and the important point is that when you stretch the feet towards the ceiling, you point the balls of the feet at the ceiling, not the toes. That gives you the right stretch in the calf muscles. You don't point the toes. You point the balls of the feet at the ceiling. And really stretch, try and really stretch your legs and hold it for a while. And that really helps with the circulation and comfort and ease of the legs. Sometimes I get the question, people are worried or concerned about their legs going numb and get pins and needles when you're sitting. Actually, there's nothing to be concerned about, unless the only way you can damage your legs from sitting is some of the extremists that sit for hours and hours without doing any walking, just continually sitting. But if you're only sitting for an hour or even an hour and a half, then you're not going to damage anything. If they start to get the pins and needles, the legs go numb, well, that's good. They don't feel them after a while. You're completely at ease. Who cares? And it's just a little bit wobbly when you stand up for a couple of minutes, then you're fine. You're not damaging anything. It's just a nerve that's getting pinched a little bit. There's another couple of little tips for ease of sitting. One is the seat. It's very important to have a good meditation seat, and you have to find by experiment what's the right height for you. Higher or lower off the ground. If you're too high or too low, it's going to be uncomfortable and difficult to keep the back straight. And then you find the right height. Generally, a harder seat is better than a denser kind of cushion than a soft one you sink into. In Thailand, they never use cushions. They just sit flat on the floor. We find that very difficult, again, because we're sitting in chairs. We don't have that ease and comfort of sitting on the floor. But if you get a good cushion and find the right height, it's very useful. Another thing is some people get pains in the shoulders, stiffness in the shoulders from sitting, and what can help with that is putting a cushion or a rolled up towel or something in your lap and resting your hands on that, so your hands are up a little bit, and that can ease the tension in the shoulder muscles. I find when I'm doing walking meditation, if I'm a bit stiff in the shoulders, I find a great relief in resting my hands in the way our lower robes are rolled. There's that knot in the front. I can rest my hands on that, and it holds the shoulders up, and probably find some equivalent. And it's usually better to sit with the back unsupported. Problem with leaning back against a pillar or against the wall or that is it tends to be more difficult to stay awake. But if you've got a very stiff back and you're having difficulties and you do use a support against the back, it's advisable to put something like a cushion or a rolled up towel on the lower back, between the back and the wall, just above the hips. So you're supporting the lower back, but you're not resting your shoulders against the wall. That's quite important. You're resting the lower back and not the upper back. That's often enough to relieve the stress on the back, but it'll still keep you in a good upright posture, and you won't be sleepy. So those are all methods for making it easier to sit. But when all that is said and done, when the meditator finally gets to the point where they're not bothered by pains in the body, it's not because the pains go away, it's because they stop making an issue of it. The pains never really go away as long as you're in a human body. Even the Buddha had backache, as recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. You're going to have difficulties with the body because it's a body. It's dukkha. In fact, the reason why the truth of dukkha is not evident naturally to the mind is said to be change of postures, because we fidget it away. So when you sit in meditation, and if you're new at meditation, and it may be the first time in your life that you've tried to really keep still for a prolonged period of time while fully awake, the pain that arises in the body is just the natural sensations in the body that usually you just avoid by fidgeting about. And on the principle that change is as good as a rest, whenever you shift your body, you don't escape from dukkha, but there's a new constellation of dukkha, so it seems okay for a few minutes, and then you want to shift again. But when you're sitting still, you're not escaping, you're not squirming away from the dukkha, you're just there with it. And it can seem, to the new beginner, it can seem overwhelming sometimes, the amount of suffering in the body. That's just the natural reality of the body. So there's different degrees and causalities of stress and pain in the body. One of them we've discussed at some length, to do with posture. If you're sitting in a poor posture, it's going to cause stress and imbalance in the body, and there's going to be extra suffering. Another is what I mentioned, the natural reality of the suffering of the body. Then there might be stresses or pains in the body that are karmic, that have to do with, might be called, in a Western modality, might be called psychosomatic, and because the body and mind are intimately related, and mental states can impact on the body. It can be something like just causing muscles to tighten in your back and causing a pull on the backbone. Or it can be just purely mentally generated painful sensations. Fourth cause of pain might be various kinds of actual damage to the body, either from illness or injury, that we have stressors on the body in that way. Dealing with all these kinds of issues, it is useful to know the causality to some degree. If you know you've got physical issues with certain parts of your body, then you can deal with that as best you can, compensate for it. One particular issue related to that is the knees. The knees are very delicate joints, easily injured. And I've known in my time two individuals, one was a monk and one was a laywoman, who, both cases, they injured their knees by sitting full lotus for a prolonged period of time. And even though they had sharp pains in the knees, they disregarded it because they wanted to just sit through it, just kind of tough it out. And that's not wise. If you're feeling sharp sensations in the knees, then change the posture. You're doing something wrong. The knees can be injured. They're delicate. This is, I would say, opposite to the back, which, unless you've got some particular medical issue with your spine, the back is quite tough. And you can get all kinds of pains in the back while you're sitting that are often they're just purely karmic or psychological. There's nothing really wrong. And most of the time you're better just to tough it out, not to fidget away from back pain, but just to go through it. Dealing with any kind of pain in the body, there's really two, in terms of meditation, there's really two approaches that are related to the Vipassana and Samatha approaches. In Samatha meditation, where you're focusing on a single object, like the breath, you should be disregarding everything else in the body, as well as anything else in the mind. Just focus on the sensation of breathing. So as far as you can, you screen out the pains in the body. You disregard them. And if you get good at this, it's actually a wonderful escape or relief from physical pain. And I can say that I found this to be true when I had my injury in my thumb. I found that in a peculiar way it actually helped my meditation, because my mind was so eager to escape from the pain, it would go into samadhi more quickly. It didn't want to be fussed with nonsense, bothered with daydreams or thinking about tomorrow or any of that nonsense. Just like, well, let's get this on. Let's get out of here. And it's recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta that the Buddha said the only time he was free of pain in his last year of life, when he was very ill, was when he could go into fourth jhana and totally screen out all the external stimuli and feelings in the body. So the development of samadhi is a boon, is a blessing for. It's a pleasant abiding here and now. Is one of the reasons for developing jhana, and it does get you out of all the kind of triviality and get you out of pain and suffering. It's temporary relief from all that. So that's one way, is disregarding it, not paying attention to it. And admittedly, that can be difficult to learn at first because it's clamoring and crying for your attention. But you learn to get away from it, disregard it. What helps with that is not identifying with it. And this is useful for even when you're not meditating, when you're just walking around doing stuff. If you got pains in the body, is not to identify with it. It's a lot less of a problem if you just notice it as painful sensation rather than, oh, my foot hurts. As long as it's my pain, it's going to be much worse than if it's just a pain, a sensation. The other approach is the Vipassana approach, where the pain becomes the object of consciousness. So rather than disregard it, you go right into it. And this is an exercise that's sometimes recommended to do if you're doing Vipassana, is occasionally to take the pain as the object of the meditation. And the tricky part is you have to do that without an agenda. If you're doing it with the intention in the mind that to relieve the pain, to release the pain somehow, then it's not gonna work. You have to just notice the pain as a sensation and just go into it. And this is challenging in part because usually when you initially do this, the pain gets worse for a while, you know, and eventually it breaks up and dissipates, and one, you know, kind of goes through the pain, penetrates it, and comes out the other side. So this is a useful exercise to do from time to time. Generally with Vipassana, you don't have to do that all the time. You would just notice the painful sensation and let it pass, let the mind move on naturally to the next object, not try not to obsess with the pain. But as a special exercise now and again, you can go into it and you just focus in on it and try to be aware of it purely as an objective sensation. Thinking about the big picture, remember that the goal of the Buddhist path is the end of suffering, to make an end of suffering completely. And that means not coming back into existence, because any form of existence is going to be some form of suffering. And in the embodied human realm, the sense desire realm, this is the realm of sense pleasures. It's also the realm of sense pain. You can't have one without the other. This is the realm of sense experience, and a good part of that is painful sensations. But in other realms that are more subtle, the Brahma realms, there's no physical pain as such, but there's still more subtle forms of suffering present in all the realms. Dukkha is built into the very fabric of samsaric reality. It's one of the three characteristics. And that's something that's important to grasp, that dukkha is not just a subjective reality. It's not just our attitude, it's not just our experience. It's the actual warp and woof of reality, that every single particle of reality, every aspect, every Dhamma is dukkha. It's inherently, objectively, in its own nature, dukkha, meaning it's imperfect, it's conditional, it's provisional, it's coming into existence, going out of existence, it's dependently arisen. This inherent imperfection of things is the only way in which there is any existence, any manifestation. Manifestation is an expression of imperfection. To be in a manifest existent state is inherently to be imperfect. So there's this constant interplay of factors and things is what makes the world dynamic. This is what makes things happen. If everything was completely balanced and at ease and perfect, there'd be nothing evidently in existence. It would just be a stasis. So this reality of dukkha means that from our particular vantage point, it means that there's always going to be, as long as we're in conditioned existence, there's always going to be some form of suffering. And you need to learn to be with that and not succumb to the desire mind that wants everything to be perfect and wants to escape from that. If you're just present with what's real, what's present right now, then you can be at ease in the midst of the imperfection, and you can carry on with your activities and with your practice.